At 91 years old, Michael Caine finally decided to talk about his old friend Sean Connery. What he shared has surprised many fans around the world. For years, people wondered about Connery's life away from the cameras. Now, Caine is telling us things that many thought would stay secret forever. Sean Connery's story didn't start with fancy suits, expensive drinks, or movie premieres. It began in Edinburgh, Scotland, in a poor neighborhood where just getting by was more important than big dreams. Born in 1930, Thomas Sean Connery grew up in a family that had very little money. His father worked in a factory, and his mother cleaned houses for other people. There was never enough money, and Sean learned about hard work when he was still very young. As a boy, Sean had to leave school early to help his family. He took any job he could find. One of his first jobs was delivering milk around Edinburgh. He would get up very early in the morning and carry bottles from door to door. This taught him about being responsible, long before other kids his age had to worry about such things. He also did many different odd jobs like polishing coffins, mixing cement, and working as a lifeguard. He worked constantly, not because he wanted fancy things, but just so his family could survive. They didn't have extra money for anything, and Sean never forgot what it felt like to be poor. When Sean got older, his size and strength helped him find new opportunities. He joined the Royal Navy when he was still a teenager, but health problems meant he couldn't stay in the military for long. Back in regular life, he worked more temporary jobs before getting interested in bodybuilding. This wasn't about looking good, it was about having discipline and finding chances to improve his life. His strong, well-built body helped him win small competitions, which led to an unexpected path. He started modeling, and then moved into acting on stage. At first, Sean only got tiny parts in theater shows and small roles on television, but trying to become an actor was extremely difficult. He had never been trained properly and spoke with a thick Scottish accent that many people didn't like. People who decided which actors to hire often dismissed him as too rough and not polished enough. He was often broke, moving between cheap rooms or sleeping on friends' couches. At one point, he almost gave up on acting completely. The struggle was wearing him down, and Hollywood seemed impossible to reach from where he was. Then James Bond changed everything. When the people making Dr. No started looking for someone to play Ian Fleming's spy character, Sean wasn't the obvious choice. Other actors were being considered, including more famous names who had already proven themselves. Sean was raw and unpolished. Some people even thought he was too rough for the part. But when he walked into the audition room, something special happened. He had a physical presence that couldn't be taught or faked. He looked rugged, confident, and unpredictable. He didn't just pretend to be smooth and sophisticated. He looked like a man who could actually be dangerous if he needed to be. Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond books, wasn't sure about Sean at first, but audiences loved him immediately. Once Dr. No came out in theaters in 1962, Sean Connery wasn't just another actor. He had become James Bond. Overnight, the boy who once delivered milk became the face of the biggest spy movie series in the world. Becoming Bond made Sean more famous than he had ever imagined possible. But this fame came with problems he hadn't expected. To the public, Sean Connery wasn't a regular man with problems, doubts, or fears. He was James Bond, perfect, smooth, and untouchable. People wanted him to be like that all the time, not just in movies. Michael Caine, who became one of Sean's closest friends, later talked about how suffocating this was. He said Sean would complain that people wouldn't let him be anyone else. No matter what role Sean took after Bond, people only saw the spy character. If he played a soldier, viewers said he was still Bond wearing a uniform. If he played a thief or a detective, audiences thought it was just Bond pretending to be someone else. The Bond character was so powerful that it erased everything else Sean tried to do as an actor. For Sean, this wasn't something to be happy about. It felt like a prison. Fame meant Sean couldn't go out to dinner without someone coming over and saying the famous line, "Bond, James Bond." Reporters only wanted to hear Bond stories. Fans only wanted Bond autographs. Movie studios only wanted more Bond movies. The real man disappeared behind the brand. Sean made millions of dollars, but in private he told friends he felt trapped by the character that had given him everything. This pressure was hard on his mind. He had worked his way up from nothing, only to find himself stuck in an image he couldn't control. Bond wasn't just a role anymore. It had become who he was, whether he wanted it or not. On screen, Sean always looked calm and in control. But away from the cameras, his frustration often exploded. Stories from movie sets describe him fighting with directors, tearing up pages of scripts he thought were poorly written, and demanding changes while they were filming. He wasn't afraid to use his star power to get his way, and people in Hollywood quickly started calling him difficult to work with. But according to Michael Caine, it wasn't just arrogance, it was anger at being put in a box. Sean felt that movie studios cared less about making good movies and more about making money from Bond. He wanted strong writing, believable stories, and respect for the art of acting. When he didn't get these things, his temper would flare up. To people watching from the outside, it looked like he had a big ego. But to Caine, it was a desperate fight to protect himself from being completely swallowed by a fake image. Caine remembered nights when Sean would call him, frustrated and angry. The two friends would talk for hours about how empty Hollywood parties felt, how fake people's smiles were, and how much backstabbing went on behind the scenes. Sean, underneath all his armor, was a man who loved acting but hated the circus that came with being famous. The phoniness of the movie industry disgusted him. He would get angry about how people changed as soon as someone became famous, all the flattery, lies, and secret deals whispered behind closed doors. What the world saw was a smooth spy who never lost control. What Caine saw was a man who carried deep anger, whose frustration with Hollywood wasn't just about work, it was about his very sense of who he was. Sean's battles with Hollywood weren't just emotional, they involved money and legal fights too. He famously fought movie producers over profits from the Bond films, accusing them of cheating him out of money he had rightfully earned. He even took studios to court, refusing to let powerful executives take advantage of him. This was unusual for actors at that time, and it made him enemies in important places. His fights went beyond Bond movies. Sean often rejected roles, even ones worth millions of dollars, if he didn't trust the people behind the project. He was so picky that it sometimes hurt his own career, but he preferred to walk away rather than compromise his principles. This stubborn streak cost him opportunities, but he never regretted his choices. In 1965, during the height of his James Bond fame, Sean gave an interview that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Speaking with Playboy magazine, he openly defended the idea of hitting women in certain situations. He said that when all other alternatives failed, he believed slapping a man could be justified. These weren't unclear words that could be misunderstood. They were clear, printed, and unmistakable. Coming from the man celebrated as the ultimate gentleman spy, the statement shocked many people, even in the 1960s. The issue didn't go away with time. More than 20 years later, in 1987, Barbara Walters confronted Sean about those comments in a televised interview. She asked him directly if he still believed what he had said in Playboy. Without hesitation, Sean repeated that yes, under certain circumstances, he still thought it was acceptable. He sat calmly, smiled slightly, and doubled down on his position in front of millions of viewers. For Michael Caine, this was a turning point in their friendship. Caine later admitted that those words haunted Sean for the rest of his life. It wasn't just a mistake or something said without thinking. It became a permanent stain on his reputation that he could never wash away. The backlash was fierce and lasted for decades. Women's groups condemned him. Protests happened outside theaters where his movies were playing. People organized boycotts, and his once perfect image began to show serious cracks. The controversies didn't stop with interviews. In 2006, Sean's ex-wife, actress Diane Cilento, published a book about their marriage that brought up old questions again. In it, she described their relationship as turbulent and painful. Cilento claimed Sean had been emotionally abusive and sometimes physically violent. She painted a picture of explosive anger, manipulation, and a marriage marked by fear. What made these controversies last so long wasn't just the interviews or accusations. It was Sean's reaction. He simply refused to back down or apologize. Over and over, advisors, friends, and publicists urged him to say sorry, or at least soften his position. He refused every time. He saw apologizing as a sign of weakness. This attitude cost him movie roles, as studios worried that hiring him would bring unwanted controversy. It cost him public goodwill as fans who once loved him struggled to understand how Bond could be so different from the real man. It also cost him peace of mind. Sean's complicated relationship with Hollywood reached its breaking point in 2003. By then, he was already a legend with decades of success behind him. But his last film, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, was the one that finally pushed him over the edge. The movie was supposed to be a big-budget comic book adaptation that could start a new series. Sean signed on for a huge paycheck, but once filming began, it quickly turned into a nightmare. He fought constantly with the director, Stephen Norrington. Crew members later described their relationship as explosive. Sean accused Norrington of being inexperienced and disorganized, while Norrington pushed back against Sean's controlling behavior on set. Arguments broke out so often that some scenes were rewritten or shot only after shouting matches. Sean wasn't shy about his feelings. He began openly criticizing not just Norrington, but studio executives as well. The movie performed poorly, got bad reviews, and Sean walked away bitter and angry. Michael Caine later explained that Sean had been frustrated with Hollywood for years, but this experience was the final straw. He was tired of battling studios, tired of arguing with directors, and tired of working on films he no longer believed in. According to Caine, Sean told him he had had enough of the idiots running the industry. After The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Sean didn't just retire from movies. He walked away entirely. He moved permanently to the Bahamas, far from Hollywood where the industry might try to pull him back in. Studios were still offering him millions to return, but Sean turned everything down. He no longer cared about the money or fame. He cared about peace. Moving to the Bahamas gave him exactly what he wanted. Far from Hollywood, he could live on his own terms without photographers following him or fans demanding Bond quotes everywhere he went. Local people described him as both distant and charming. He wasn't someone who mixed with crowds constantly, but when people did meet him, he could still turn on the charm that made him famous. For years, rumors spread that he might make a comeback. Studios kept offering huge amounts of money, hoping to convince him to return. He never accepted. To Sean, the decision was final. He had made peace with leaving it all behind. He didn't want the spotlight anymore. He wanted freedom, and he had found it. Behind the scenes of his seemingly perfect life, Sean carried personal struggles that very few people ever saw. One of the deepest wounds came from his relationship with his only son, Sean Connery. Jason also became an actor and director, but their bond was complicated. Friends close to the family said their arguments were legendary. Both men were strong-willed, proud, and stubborn. Small disagreements often exploded into long periods where they barely spoke to each other. Michael Caine, who was close to both of them, said they were two proud Scottish men who couldn't express what they felt. Sean loved his son, and Jason loved him back, but neither man was good at showing it. Pride and bad tempers often got in the way of simple expressions of love. For Sean, who grew up tough and rarely shared emotions openly, being a father was never easy. And for Jason, living in the shadow of a world-famous parent brought its own pressures. In his final years, Sean developed Alzheimer's disease. At first, it came quietly. He would forget small details, stumble over words, or lose track of conversations. For a man once admired for his wit and intelligence, these problems were painful. Michael Caine, who had known him for decades, later recalled how difficult it was to watch his sharp mind fade piece by piece. As the disease got worse, the man who had commanded movie sets, with a single look, began to lose awareness of the world around him. Friends who called or visited sometimes left in tears, realizing that Sean no longer recognized them. The contrast between the indestructible James Bond on screen and the vulnerable man in real life could not have been greater. Despite the painful decline, Sean was not alone. His wife, Micheline Roquebrune, became his anchor. The two had been married since 1975, and their bond only grew stronger as Sean's health weakened. Micheline was fiercely protective of him and refused to hand over his care to strangers. She stayed by his side every day, ensuring that his final years were as dignified as possible. Sean's greatest fear was dying in a hospital, and Micheline made sure that didn't happen. He passed away peacefully at home in the Bahamas in 2020, in his own bed with the sound of the ocean outside and his wife nearby. For a man who had spent his entire career fighting for control, it was the closest thing to leaving life on his own terms. His death brought tributes from around the world. Fans celebrated him as the ultimate James Bond and one of the most charismatic actors of all time. But for Michael Caine, the grief was deeply personal. He wasn't mourning a character or a legend. He was mourning his old friend, a man who was brilliant, flawed, stubborn, and loyal in ways the public would never fully understand. Throughout his career, there were whispers that Hollywood sometimes quietly turned its back on Sean. On the surface, it looked like he was simply taking breaks between films. But rumors inside the industry suggested something else, that he was being deliberately frozen out. Sean had a reputation for fighting studios over money and creative control, and this made him dangerous to executives who relied on order and control. Stories surfaced over the years of major producers quietly keeping him at arm's length. Then scripts that had once been lined up for him suddenly disappeared. Studio offers slowed down, even though audiences still wanted to see him on screen. Some believed the studios had grown tired of his demands and were deliberately avoiding him. Sean Connery was more than just James Bond. He was a complex man who fought his way up from poverty to become one of the most recognizable faces in the world. His story is one of triumph and struggle, of a man who refused to compromise his principles even when it cost him dearly. Michael Caine's revelations remind us that behind the smooth spy was a real person with real problems, real pain, and real humanity.